May 1981. A closed conference room inside the first chief directorate of the KGB, Moscow. The chairman of the KGB, Yuri Andropov, stood up in front of senior intelligence officers. According to officers who were in the room, he said one sentence: "The United States is actively preparing for nuclear war against the Soviet Union." That sentence launched what would become the largest peacetime intelligence operation in Soviet history. Its code name was 3 letters, RYAN. In Russian, Raketno-Yadernое Napadenie, nuclear missile attack. For the next 3 years, every KGB station from London to Lagos was ordered to watch for one thing: the signs that the United States was about to strike first. They watched blood banks. They watched church lighting. They watched the overtime hours of government ministers. They watched the price of beef. They watched everything. The problem was that the United States was not preparing a first strike. But Yuri Andropov believed it was. And in November 1983, that belief brought the world closer to nuclear war than at any point since October 1962. This is what the declassified files say. To understand how the head of Soviet intelligence convinced himself that the West was minutes from launching, you have to understand what Moscow saw in the years leading up to that May 1981 speech. In January 1981, Ronald Reagan was inaugurated as the 40th President of the United States. Within weeks, his administration was speaking publicly about the Soviet Union in terms that had not been heard in a decade. The American defense budget rose sharply. New weapon systems were funded. Pershing II ballistic missiles, capable of reaching Moscow in roughly 6 minutes from launch sites in West Germany, were scheduled for deployment beginning in 1983. To senior Soviet planners, 6 minutes was not a warning time. It was a guarantee that any nuclear exchange would have to be fought and decided in the first hour. In Moscow, Leonid Brezhnev was visibly ill. He had been General Secretary since 1964. By 1981, he could barely read a prepared speech aloud. Real power inside the Politburo had shifted to the man sitting 2 seats away from him. That man was Yuri Andropov. He had directed Soviet intelligence for 15 years. He had been the Soviet ambassador in Budapest during the 1956 uprising. He had been the architect of the response to the Prague Spring in 1968. He believed sincerely that Reagan was different from his predecessors. Not a Cold War manager, but an ideological adversary. He believed Reagan intended to win. The operational order went out from Moscow Center in the autumn of 1981. Every KGB residency abroad was instructed to participate. The cable was sent to stations in Washington, London, Bonn, Paris, Tokyo, Ottawa, and dozens of capitals beyond. The instructions were unusually specific. Watch the blood banks of major Western cities. Our stockpiles being increased, our donor drives being expanded. Watch the lights inside government ministries late at night. Our senior officials working unusual overtime. Are the windows of the Pentagon lit when they should be dark? Watch churches and cathedrals near military facilities. Are services being held at unusual hours? Are priests being briefed? Watch slaughterhouses. Is the rate of butchering rising? Is meat being preserved and frozen for stockpiling? Watch the movement of nuclear scientists, of senior bankers, of high-ranking clergy, of the families of senior officials. To intelligence officers trained in the rigorous tradecraft of the Cold War, these requests seemed, in the words of one former resident, quote, ridiculous, end quote. But Moscow Center wanted compliance, not analysis. Stations that reported nothing were assumed to be lazy. Stations that reported alarming indicators received praise. Within months, the reporting bent toward what Moscow wanted to hear. What Moscow Center did not know was that one of the most senior KGB officers stationed in London had already been working for British intelligence for 7 years. His name was Oleg Gordievsky. He had been recruited by the British Secret Intelligence Service, MI6, in 1974. By 1982, he was the deputy resident at the Soviet embassy in London. By 1985, he would be the resident, the chief of KGB operations in Britain. Gordievsky received the Ryan instructions like every other officer. He then handed them to his British handlers. For the first time, the West learned that Soviet intelligence was not merely watching. It was watching for the start of a war the West did not know it was supposed to be planning. The British passed Gordievsky's reporting to Washington. Initially, senior CIA analysts were skeptical. The indicators seemed too strange. Surely no serious intelligence service believed that blood bank inventories could predict nuclear war. The reporting was filed. Then came 1983. In March, Reagan delivered the speech in which he called the Soviet Union, quote, an evil empire, end quote. 2 weeks later, he announced the Strategic Defense Initiative. In Moscow, this was read not as defense, but as the missing piece of a first strike doctrine. On September 1, 1983, a Soviet Su-15 interceptor shot down Korean Airlines Flight 007 over the Sea of Japan. 269 civilians were killed. Inside the Politburo, the consensus was that the flight had been a deliberate American provocation. 25 days later, on September 26th, Stanislav Petrov sat in a Soviet early warning bunker outside Moscow and saw 5 intercontinental ballistic missiles on his screen. He did not report them. That story is on this channel. Then, in early November 1983, NATO began a command post exercise across Western Europe. Its codename was Able Archer 83. It simulated the procedures for the release of nuclear weapons. To Operation Ryan watchers in Moscow, it looked exactly like the cover for a real first strike. Gordievsky sent a flash cable to London. He told MI6 that the Soviet leadership believed Able Archer was the real thing. The British took Gordievsky's warning seriously. In late 1983 and early 1984, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher arranged for an extraordinary briefing. The senior British intelligence assessment of Operation Ryan, built almost entirely on Gordievsky's reporting, was hand-carried to Washington and shown to President Reagan personally. According to multiple memoirs and the later 2015 declassified report of the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board, Reagan was shaken. He had assumed the Soviets understood that the United States would never launch first. The briefing told him they did not assume that at all. In his private diary entry around this period, Reagan wrote that he had not realized the depth of Soviet anxiety. He began quietly to change his public language. The phrase, quote, evil empire, end quote, disappeared from his speeches. By January 1984, he delivered a televised address in which he said, quote, my dream is to see the day when nuclear weapons will be banished from the face of the earth, end quote. Inside Moscow, Operation Ryan was quietly wound down in the course of 1984. Yuri Andropov died in February 1984. His successor, Konstantin Chernenko, was already dying when he took office. In March 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev became General Secretary. The geometry of the Cold War began to change. The Western public knew none of this at the time. This is how the documents reached daylight. In 1985, Oleg Gordievsky was recalled to Moscow under suspicion. With the help of MI6, he was smuggled out of the Soviet Union in the boot of a diplomatic car. His debriefing in Britain became the foundation of what the West understood about Ryan. His account was published in 2 co-authored books with the historian Christopher Andrew, The Stormbirds in 1989 and KGB, The Inside Story in 1990. In 1990, the United States declassified a Special National Intelligence Estimate, SNIE 11-984. Its title was, quote, Implications of Recent Soviet Military Political Activities, end quote. It conceded in carefully chosen words that the agency had underestimated how seriously the Soviet leadership had taken the prospect of a Western first strike. In 1997, the Center for the Study of Intelligence, the CIA's own internal historical office, published a monograph by the historian Benjamin B. Fischer. Its title was, quote, A Cold War Conundrum, end quote. Its subject was the 1983 Soviet war scare. Its conclusion was, in essence, that Western intelligence had not understood at the time how close the situation had come. That is the story of Operation Ryan. What it shows is that a nuclear war does not require a war plan. It requires only one side to believe, with conviction, that the other side has one. 2 years after Andropov launched Ryan, a satellite glitched inside a Soviet bunker, and one lieutenant colonel decided not to call it in. 6 weeks after that, NATO ran an exercise across Western Europe that the Kremlin read as the opening of the real thing. Both of those stories are on this channel. Watch the trilogy in order. If you want a declassified document fact each day, follow at recordsec26979 on X.